Great. So today I want to talk about this tweet from Bill Hutchison, and he says the top 10% of earners in Canada, over 96,000 in income, pay 55% of taxes. The bottom 40% pay 4.6%. With refundable tax credits, rebates, and benefits, some can earn up to 80,000 and pay no income tax. Where's the dollars going to come from? Now again, this is the problem when it comes to this whole tax the rich, the poor, pay their fair share, the poor don't, all this kind of stuff that you hear. And it's all BS. Like, it's all complete BS in that, I mean, for starters, people may dispute this, but the second point being is that that the whole tax the rich crowd is being disingenuous, for many reasons, but the first one being they don't actually tell you the actual percentage of taxes that the rich pay, right? Like, imagine if it, because again, I'll give you an example. They would be like, hey, the top 10% or the top, let's say the top 1%, the top 1% only pay 2% of the taxes, right? But the reality is that the top 1% probably are 10 to 20 times overrepresented when it comes to taxes, right? So, and they don't tell you that because if the average person heard that amount and they heard, hey, the top 10% or pay 55% of income taxes, 5.5 times more than the average person would hear that and be like, that's if anything, that might be, I mean, if you ask me, that's too much, but the average person will be like, hey, that seems relatively fair, right? So this whole tax the rich garbage, it doesn't make any sense. And here's the problem when it comes to discussing politics, or one of the many problems these days in any of these philosophies, is that the first thing you have to figure out is, are people projecting? Like, when people argue anything or argue against anything, are they just projecting? And when it comes to this kind of stuff, people oftentimes are, because again, do you want to tax the rich more because you want to help the poor, or do you want to tax the rich more because you want more of their money? Because again, when you put it like that, it sounds a heck of a lot different than when we want to help the poor, right? So again, that's the problem too. And here's the thing. If people actually made that argument or were actually honest about it, at least we could have a little bit more of a cordial conversation. The problem is, like I say, is that most people want to tax the rich more because they want more money for themselves. They don't really care about the poor because, again, if they cared about the poor, they would be like, hey, we're going to implement this policy. If it doesn't definitively help the poor, we will get rid of it. They never do that. Why? Because they probably know it's not actually going to help the poor. The problem is, from the politicians' perspectives, it benefits them. And I mean, here's the other thing too. Another thing they bring up is, oh, the rich want to be taxed more, which is only true of certain aspects of it. People making 100,000, to 200, maybe 300,000 a year, those kind of people don't want to be taxed more. And why is that? Because they already pay a lot more taxes than they should have to. And number two, they're not exactly filthy rich, right? Like, you're living very comfortably, but you're not filthy rich. The filthy rich, a lot of those kind of people want to pay taxes more, I believe, because they have a guilty conscience, right? They have a guilty conscience. And especially, like, a lot of these, I mean, most of them, it's because they're incredibly talented, they're incredibly good. But you look at a lot of these people, it's classic, imposter syndrome, right? Like, they got wealthy, they don't feel like they deserve all the wealth or most of the wealth. And because of that, they have the whole, let's tax us more mentality to kind of relieve said guilt, right? So I believe that it's largely just projecting their guilty conscience, right? I think that's what that is. Um, and again, here's the other thing too. They would be right also if it actually worked. This whole tax the rich idea doesn't work, because what happens when you raise taxes on the rich? Eventually, there comes a point to where, like, hey, this isn't fair anymore. I'm just gonna leave. And what happens is, rather than getting a little bit of taxes, you get no taxes. I mean, you see this phenomena in New York right now. New York is, I believe, the only city in North America, maybe even the world, that has its own income tax. New York has its own income tax. I don't know exactly how they do it, but they have it. And because they're threatening to, or they may already have raised taxes, many rich people are leaving New York. And this is the problem. And here's the craziest part about it too. You have these progressives and lefties out there that what's their solution to it? Oh, it's raise taxes on the rich, right? They're leaving because we raise their taxes too much. The solution is to raise more taxes and lose more people. This is the problem with these kind of people, is that they're so ignorant that they will never admit they're wrong. And this is why these leftists, these socialist and far leftist societies always completely collapse, because they never admit they're wrong. They maybe start out with good intentions. They start out genuinely wanting to help the poor, but because just giving people free stuff doesn't work, and because they never admit they're wrong, you always end up with socialism or communism, which eventually fails. So again, that's the many problems with that. But again, it's just I mean, this is Canada in general. Like, Canada is in some really, really bad times right now, and most people don't realize it. Number one, because they're just blatantly ignorant, and number two, because there's a lot of free money being thrown around right now, and eventually the free money is going to run out. Because again, if and here's the thing too, if the free money legitimately will never run out, then why not give people more, right? Like, either free money it can work or it can't. There's no in between. And by that, I mean, um, either you should give people a certain amount or you can't give anything. Because again, if a little bit of free money can work, then more free money should be able to work. Because again, if it can't work, it's because it'll eventually devalue the dollar. Everything just goes belly up, right? So yeah, that's the problem when it comes to that. But again, here's the other problem too, is that um, there's such an incentive for these poor people to not get a job and earn more money, that it just creates more of them and it keeps them in the same place. I mean, if you look at the top 20% of earners and the bottom 20% of earners in the States, the top 20%, people are 5 times more likely to work a full-time job than people on the bottom. So again, this quote unquote wealth gap and the gap between the rich and the poor, it's mainly, at least not mainly, but in a large part due to the fact that the people at the bottom just don't work. And if they do, it's usually part-time, right? So that is the main problem. Like, that is the main problem. So I mean, here's the other thing too, is that the majority of people that are in the bottom, whatever, 10 or 20%, aren't going to be in there forever. And the majority of people that are in the top 1% aren't going to be in there forever. This is another fallacy, that people think that, oh, you're in the 1%, you're set for life. Well, no, that's really not. I mean, you're probably set for life, but you're not going to be in there forever. I mean, the problem is people constantly see the exceptions to the rule. They see the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezoses, and they think that that's everyone. But the reality is that most people who are millionaires, they're not making that much money. They may have, struck gold for a year or two or a handful of years, but eventually their luck runs out and they regress to the mean, right? That's, most people regress to the mean. So that is another problem. So anyway, I wanted to make a video kind of talking about this whole, it's just a pure fallacy, like, in many reasons. Number one, the idea that we can solve all our problems by just taxing the rich more. And number two, the fact that the poor are just downtrodden and it's through no fault of their own, and they're exploited. And some of them are, like, some of them are, but the majority of them aren't. The majority of people at the bottom are people who are paid to be poor. They're on welfare, they're on this form of assistance, that form of assistance, and because they would need a full-time job making well over minimum wage, they never get off it, because again, it's not worth it in their minds. So again, that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure you follow me on Twitter mainly, but also BitChute and Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.